Shalom, or hello, how are you? I'm Eileen Mackevich, the director of the library and the museum, and want to tell you about an extraordinary exhibit called With Firmness in the Right, Lincoln and the Jews. Here with me to talk about this new exhibit, which opens on August 3rd through November 15th, are two Springfield rabbis, and I will ask them to introduce themselves.
I'm Rabbi Michael Datz, the rabbi of what is today known as Temple Bris Shalom, but in President Lincoln's time would have been known as the Springfield Hebrew Congregation.
And I'm Rabbi Barry Marks, the rabbi of Temple, Israel.
I can tell you, rabbis, that when many people have asked me about this exhibit, they've said, what's so unusual about Lincoln and the Jews? What's so unusual that you should have an exhibit on Jews? Could we have an exhibit on other migration periods as well? And so I want to ask you, what's so unusual, rabbis, about this exhibit?
I think Lincoln, as I believe the exhibit points out, was the first president of the United States to have a significant number of Jewish friends and acquaintances. And there's a wonderful diagram in the book of 150 people, varying circles of close friends, branching out to acquaintances, and that he was the first American president to have that many Jewish acquaintances.
And this is at a time when I think there are about 150,000 Jews in the entire country. So this is rather unusual.
Well, and as the book points out in one of the chapters, it's not only that Lincoln had friends and acquaintances who were Jewish and apparently bore no prejudice, had no preconceived notions about Jews, no desire to convert them or anything like that, but from the point of view of those Jews themselves, most of whom were immigrant Jews from Germany or Central Europe, to be able to claim friendship or an acquaintance with Abraham Lincoln, to have a friendship with a head of state would have been unthinkable, absolutely unheard of back in the old country in Europe. So from their point of view, it was testimony to the possibilities, the potentials of life in a free America.
We're sitting here in a very unusual place, if you will. This is a half-finished exhibit area. It's, for those of you familiar with the museum and library, this is the treasures area, which for a few short months is converted to an exhibit area for Lincoln and the Jews. To my left, we see something: the Jews as a class, violating every regulation of trade, are hereby expelled from the department within 24 hours from the receipt of this order. This was a statement by General Grant, and it was an extraordinary thing to say: within 24 hours, out you go from this large military district. What's this all about, Rabbi Marks?
Well, there was a lot of smuggling and speculating, trading and contraband going on at the time, and Grant's own father was involved in some of these dealings, and Grant singled out the Jews as scapegoats. There were apparently some Jewish speculators, but certainly not everybody who did this was Jewish. And I think the great thing about Lincoln was that he refused to condemn any group, not only religious groups, but ethnic groups as a class. And he promptly reversed this order.
And that's amazing, because he certainly needed General Grant at the time.
And I think a lot of the generals, both on the Union and the Confederate side, harbored many of the prejudices of the time against Jews.
They certainly did. Rabbi, you were talking before about the fact that Springfield is a special place. Not only is it Lincoln's hometown, but Lincoln and the Jews has a special place here in Springfield.
Well, I think some of his earliest friendships, or if not friendships, acquaintances with Jews began in this area. There are at least 4 individuals who claim some kind of connection to Abraham Lincoln. Probably the most prominent would be Abraham Jonas. More about him in a moment. But even before Abraham Jonas may have been his most valued friend, as he writes in some correspondence many years later, but certainly was by no means the first. Probably his first introduction to Jews was the Salzenstein family. Louis Salzenstein and his brother Elias lived in the town of Athens. That would be Athens for most people, but
In
Illinois,
it's Athens.
less central Illinois, it's Athens here. At any rate, Louis Salzenstein had some kind of a dry goods store, which also served as the post office. And being the post office, I guess it must have been some kind of a community center, a gathering place for trading news and gossip and whatnot. And I assume Abraham Lincoln was living in New Salem at the time and would go to Athens. Became friends with Louis Salzenstein. Later on, became an attorney for his brother Elias, who apparently was a litigious fellow. And what I'm told by another Lincoln scholar, Gary Zola, is that very often he would stay over the night in Salzenstein's dry goods store, sleep on the couch or whatever, and so became acquainted with the Salzensteins. And then through the Salzensteins, perhaps, became friends with a gentleman named Louis Hammersloff. Now, Hammersloff ran, again, these were all German immigrants in their maybe 20s or 30s. Louis Hammersloff ran a men's clothing store, I think here in Springfield. And Lincoln quite likely purchased some clothing through Louis Hammersloff. Later down the road, during the war years, Hammersloff also provided uniforms for the regiments that were based in this area and prospered very much as a result. Later on, sold his store and moved to New York. But in the meantime, counted himself as, at the very least, an acquaintance of Abraham Lincoln, attended his first inauguration, evidently, was accompanied by Mrs. Lincoln's sister. So again, there was this interaction going on, which would have been absolutely unthinkable in Europe. And yet here, there seemed to be no barriers, no prejudices harbored. You know, I imagine Lincoln must have been just a chatty, friendly sort of guy anyway.
Well, he was a good retail politician, as they
was quite
say.
happy to chew the fat and buy his
Good
clothes.
storyteller also.
Yeah, exactly. Now, apparently his most celebrated acquaintance, and perhaps person who had a great deal of influence, was this man, Abe Jonas, with whom he shared some kind of English heritage, same name. They were both Abraham and both called Abe.
Yes.
I don't know a great deal about Abe Jonas. His brother Joseph had emigrated from England to Cincinnati. Abe followed him a couple of years later, and then after some family setbacks and tragedies, moved to Kentucky, became involved in both the Masons as well as politics, and later transplanted himself to Quincy, Illinois. And then being an attorney and involved in local politics, found his way to Springfield, where he and Abe Lincoln probably moved in the same legal circle, several attorney colleagues, and apparently a mutual admiration society for Henry Clay. That seems to have been what brought the two individuals together. And
Well, they were Whigs. They loved Clay.
that too. But they, as I say, they obviously found common ground on a lot of levels, and formed a very firm friendship out of that, which I think probably had, some effects further down the road. I don't know, if Rabbi, you want to comment on that? Or
I think that my favorite story in the entire exhibit has to do with his chiropodist, or as we say today, podiatrist, foot doctor. Rabbi Mark, would you tell us about him, and then we'll absolutely entice everyone to come to this exhibit.
And that would be Issachar Zachary, who is kind of a mysterious character, apparently born in England and came over to the States as a young child. The specialty of foot diseases and treatment of them was relatively new, and apparently he was one of the pioneers. He made a lot of mysterious claims about himself and what kind of medical training he had, not all of which can be proven or backed up by documents. And he was something of a self-promoter. He became a friend of William Cullen Bryant, a very celebrated literary figure, and managed to treat a great many celebrities of the day.
Well,
and
he really cured people's backaches. I mean, I think
yeah,
today
it
we
wasn't
really
only,
do
only
understand.
So he wasn't
only corns
he
and
wasn't a
bunions.
charlatan chiropodist. He
No.
was
He really was a fellow who fixed your feet, and then today we understand that if you have a pain in your foot, you're going to get a pain in your back. But that was, I think, relatively new, and Lincoln said that.
And like the people who advertised that they're painless dentists, he advertised that he would treat your feet without the knife, without surgery.
And just to entice you a little bit more, he may really also have been a spy. He may also have provided Lincoln with intelligence about the Confederacy.
And particularly in New Orleans, where there was a large Jewish community, and it was under Union occupation.
so that's where their paths actually crossed,
Yes,
was in New
yes,
Orleans.
yeah.
Okay.
So that this is a really interesting set of relationships, and it provides new light on Abraham Lincoln. And I suspect that this exhibit will further our thinking about Lincoln and immigration. To close again, 150,000 people, Jews, are in the United States at the time, and Lincoln has a host of these friends. Thank you.